All right, let's dive right in. Today, we are getting into the story of one of history's most fascinating and, frankly, complicated figures, Frederick the Great of Prussia. We're talking about a philosopher king, a military genius, and, as we're about to see, the central character in one of Freemasonry's biggest mysteries. And that whole mystery really just boils down to this one single explosive question. So the legend is that Frederick, literally on his deathbed, single-handedly reorganized all of global Freemasonry, that he created the blueprint for what we know today as the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, one of the most widespread Masonic systems on the planet. But is it true? Or is it one of history's most brilliant and successful forgeries? Okay, to get to the bottom of this myth, we first have to understand the man. And that means we have to go back to his brutal, traumatic youth, a time that pushed him toward the secret, egalitarian world of a Masonic lodge. You know, for Prince Frederick, life was a battle between two completely different universes. On one side, you had his father, the soldier king, a man whose world was built on dogmatic authority, crude militarism, and just constant physical violence. But then, Frederick discovered something else. Freemasonry, and it promised a totally different reality, a world of light and reason, the very promise of the Enlightenment itself. It was a place of brotherhood, where you were judged by your character and merit, not your royal title. This wasn't just some hobby for him. For him, this was a lifeline, an intellectual sanctuary. And this timeline, wow, it really puts his decision into perspective. His entire childhood was just one long story of abuse, hitting this horrifying peak in 1730 when his father forced him to watch the beheading of his closest friend. Just imagine that. So after years of this, he finally discovers Masonic ideals. And it all culminates on the night of August 14th, 1738, when he makes this profound act of rebellion. He secretly gets initiated into Freemasonry, an act that could have literally cost him his life if his father found out. Now, what's so fascinating here is what that single night tells us about who he was and what he was planning. First off, the mortal risk he took proves this wasn't some casual dalliance. This was a deadly serious commitment. Second, he insisted on being treated not as a prince, but as an equal. He truly believed in the ideal. And third, and this is a huge clue, his very first act as a Mason was to bring in one of his military captains. Right from day one, he saw Freemasonry as a powerful tool for building a new kind of trust and loyalty within his future army. And this brings us to a major turning point, because when the rebellious prince finally becomes king in 1740, he doesn't keep his Masonic ties a secret. Just the opposite. He yanks it out of the shadows and transforms it into an instrument of the state. In fact, one of his very first acts as king was to go public with his membership. He established the Three Globes Lodge right there in Berlin, made it the Grandmother Lodge of Prussia, and put it under his direct royal protection. Now, you have to remember, this was a time when the Pope had condemned Freemasonry. So for a king to do this, it was a revolutionary act. He literally turned it into a royal art. So here's the crucial point. Frederick's interest in Masonry, especially in its higher knightly degrees, wasn't about mysticism or esoteric secrets. No, this was pure Enlightenment pragmatism. He saw it as the perfect tool to forge a completely new kind of nobility, one loyal not to their ancient family names, but to his state. And this quote, it says everything about his entire political philosophy. This wasn't just some catchy slogan. You could argue this is the birth certificate of our modern concept of civil service. He used the ideals of Masonic knighthood, with its powerful vows of service and sacrifice, to transform Prussia's old feudal nobles into a modern, disciplined officer corps, an elite bound to this new, secular religion of state service. So how'd he do it? It was a brilliant three-step process. First, he used Masonic philosophy to completely redefine nobility. True nobility, he argued, isn't about your bloodline. It's about your service to Prussia. Simple as that. Second, he took the ethical oaths of Masonic knighthood and reframed them as absolute loyalty to the state. And finally, in a masterstroke, he merged state symbols, like the super prestigious Order of the Black Eagle, with Masonic symbolism, creating this powerful, shared identity for his new elite. Which brings us right back to the heart above our mystery, the Grand Constitutions of 1786. This is the foundational document, the bedrock of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. And it claims that Frederick the Great himself was its author, that this was his final grand act as a Mason. So what did this document actually claim to do? Well, according to the text, Frederick, acting as the sovereign grand protector of the entire order, expanded the system to 33 degrees, established the 33rd degree as the ultimate authority, and then transferred his own Masonic power to all future supreme councils around the world. And all of this was supposedly signed on May 1st, 1786, just 3 months before he died. But when historians started digging in, a massive debate just exploded. And as you can see, the two sides are worlds apart. The American thesis, championed by the famous Masonic leader Albert Pike, argued Frederick was lucid and totally capable of doing this. But European historians came back with some hard facts. On that date, Frederick was severely ill, his hands were paralyzed, and he was in Potsdam, not Berlin. On top of that, there are zero records of any such meeting in the Berlin archives, and the signature itself doesn't even match his official one. Their conclusion? A flat-out forgery. So how did the Scottish Rite survive this devastating historical takedown? Well, this is where Albert Pike made a brilliant, pragmatic defense. He basically argued that it doesn't matter if Frederick physically signed it or not. As this quote shows, he believed a law becomes legitimate when the people agree to live by it. Since Masons everywhere accepted these constitutions as their founding Magna Carta, it became valid through their consent. It's a really fascinating argument about the nature of law itself. So, okay. If the historical evidence is pretty clear that he didn't sign the document, what is Frederick the Great's real, undisputed legacy in the world of Freemasonry? I mean, is the myth all there is? Not even close. His true legacy is maybe even more profound. He might not be the physical author of that document, but he is, without a doubt, its spiritual father. First, he took the mystical idea of knighthood and secularized it, turning it into a modern ethic of discipline, merit, and service to the state, a classic Enlightenment project. Second, by giving Masonry his royal protection, he shielded it from the church and allowed it to flourish when it was under attack everywhere else. And finally, the very philosophy of the Scottish Rite, its deep emphasis on hierarchy, order, and merit, is a direct reflection of Frederick's own model of enlightened absolutism. The system is built in his image. So that leaves us with this final, really powerful question to chew on. In the story of how our great institutions are built, what really matters more? The verifiable truth with a signature on a piece of paper? Or the incredible power and order that grew from the myth that signature created? It's a fascinating question about where legitimacy truly comes from. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.